Okay, let's get this show on the road.
Given the lockdown, I don't know if that's going to be possible. I mean, not the lockdown, the open up strategy part two or whatever it's called. Yeah, it's a weird time because I go out to get groceries and things and I see like just like a regular old day, regular working day, everyone's going to work about their business in close proximity to others, and it's very weird because the thing is that lockdowns have been opening up around the world, but
Yeah.
like we don't really have a vaccine yet. We have barely done so. The idea behind the lockdown was that we can make sure that the curve doesn't go too high, like we have enough facilities for everyone. And so the idea was that we have a lockdown and then we expand on our healthcare facilities, maybe build more ICUs, get more equipment, PPE, all that kind of jazz. But like all of the stuff around that has been quite skeptical. Like there's very little actual change in terms of that. And I think just today there was an article in some newspaper that I read, that we have something like 94 lakh tests done in India, and we have around 5.5 lakh cases positive. I mean, it's good that we've got some testing done, but it's nothing in terms of the sheer population of India. So
Yeah.
it's weird, and like despite all of those sort of problems still existing, but it's just at this point we've just given up on everything. We're like, yeah, we can't keep doing this for much longer. People are like having issues, so let's just go back to it and just ignore the fact that there ever was a pandemic, and let's just hope that nothing too bad happens.
Yeah.
And it seems like a very hopeful strategy, but I'm not sure how effective it's going to be in the long run. But yeah, I'm still trying to stay at home as much as possible, staying away. I go out usually once in 3 or 4 days, or I try to at least.
Yeah. For me, it's really weird because I didn't really feel any like particular change.
There wasn't really a lockdown there, was there?
No, so Sweden did not lock down anything. Although, like, my house did do a self quarantine for some time. Like, we minimized going out as much as we could, and the schools turned to online classes and things like that. There was still not very much of a lockdown kind of scenario happening here, and
Yeah.
people went about their lives more or less as they used to. I guess there is just a little bit more sort of care they're taking with respect to like if you're feeling sick, you're more excused to stay home. But that's not
Right.
saying much because, like, overall, even before this, in Sweden, it's actually much easier and much more okay for you to stay home if you're feeling ill.
Right.
And that's just how they've been doing things, rather.
Mm-hmm.
After I heard that Sweden wasn't doing a lockdown, at first it seemed kind of weird to me, but then recently, the more I've spoken to like my classmates and Swedish students and people from like southern Sweden and people who live up here in the northern parts and stuff, I have kind of started getting the rationale behind their decisions, that why Sweden did not pursue a lockdown and why it was okay for them to not do it, so to speak.
Right.
There has been criticism of the method that they chose and the kind of negative effects of that, but more or less it's been kind of okay. In many ways, the businesses have been working as they used to. There wasn't really a significant lockdown anywhere, and people in general, people's lives have been less affected, which is nice in terms of like mental well-being and stuff like that. It's you get to go outside and you don't have to stick around inside in the heat or the cold or whatever. It works because in general there aren't that many people in Sweden. I mean, the population
Right.
density isn't that much, and when you move away from like the big cities, then the population density is even lower.
Yeah.
So what happens is, like, I mean, in general, you don't meet that many people on your day-to-day life. And
Right.
since that already, like, that's just how it is, it was possible for Sweden to take these measures and be okay with it. So it's been interesting. I was actually quite weirded out when I first heard that there was no lockdown, because it seemed like every country on the planet was pursuing a lockdown except Sweden. But for us, at least, it was nice because we still avoided like contact and social gatherings and stuff like that. At the same time, when we needed to go to the stores were always open, or the transit system, the buses were always running. They took some measures and they created some distancing, they created some gaps where you have to keep some space between people, but other than that, there was not a huge change in the outside world. So we got kind of lucky on that front. It's been a weird few months, which to me they kind of feel more like a year or so, and I'm noticing this when I talk to other people. It's like 4 months ago feels like a year before, like just in terms of the time spent. And like a lot of people have asked me, oh, so has it been like 2 years since you went to Sweden? And I'm like, no, it's barely been a year in real time, but it feels much longer.
Yeah, but also in a very weird way, like the last few months seem to have coalesced into one blob of things. Like in my head, it just feels like a month or so, because there has been a long like period of time, and it does feel like a completely different world right now. But like, because not much has really happened in terms of day-to-day life. Like if the pandemic had not happened, if the lockdowns were not in effect, things would be quite different, especially for me, because like I would have graduated from college, I would have been out and working in the industry, I would probably have moved to a different city and like gotten a job and everything, and that would be like a very different experience. But since that has not happened, and also almost every day is basically just sitting at home and a different version of doing things. So one day you're doing things would be editing a video, editing this podcast, recording this podcast, writing something, or just sitting down and reading a book, which has been a nice little thing that has happened. But apart from that, it feels like just one big blob of just monotony and dullness. But it's been very mixed feelings, which almost feels like a very weird way to put it, and sort of diminutive of the actual scenario. Because like I'm sure that people in say like from a century ago, when the Spanish flu was happening, and I'm sure people would not have been sitting at home thinking, oh yeah, it was a very weird time, but yeah, there were goods and there were bads, because I'm guessing it was far more bad than it was good. And for us, at least, for people like us who can sit at home and work from home, or just be entertained as well, like I don't remember a time when I've had this much time to read a book in the last few years. And it feels like a very bright silver lining of a very dark cloud.
That's a really nice way to put it. I like that. I mean, we have been very lucky in terms of just where we are and what we have. For me, it's been an interesting experience, because it kind of turned the general experience that I was having, and it took that from like level 5 and turned it up to 11. Because over here, due to the snow and due to the winter and the cold and everything, more or less we were stuck indoors as much as we could. I mean, we went to the university and everything else, but it wasn't a super outdoorsy experience here to begin with. And once the pandemic sort of set in, once we kind of started staying indoors all the time, that just kind of magnified or heightened the whole experience. And it was a fun challenge for me. And I know that I'm very lucky to say fun, but it was interesting to like see how I could get around the problems that were faced in like with staying indoors, with like not having a lot of variation in life. And it was I
Yeah.
was happy to observe myself through like monotony and like boring things. And it was also good because I happily was able to get in touch with a lot of people because they were also free, which doesn't happen too often. People across
Yeah.
many different fields and like jobs are all free at the same time. And I had some nice Zoom meetings with like a huge group of people, which was fun
Mm-hmm.
because regardless of pandemic or not, I would probably not have been able to meet those people for some time. So it was a good thing.
Right.
Yeah, but other than that, there have been some pretty bad days and some pretty bad news coming through the internet.
Yeah. And it's just, I think it has been, it just feels like it has also been a very weird timing for a lot of other issues to crop up in a
Yeah,
lot
that's
of other
true.
places, as well as here. And like it has had effect on a lot of things. And those discussions are extremely important, those are extremely relevant. And like even I think during the beginning of the pandemic also, it was quite clearly seen that the disease sort of affected people disproportionately based on their income level and
Yeah.
their sort of where they stay and things like that. So it was not completely unrelated, but the fact that these matters came to a head just shows it demonstrates a lot of different things. And I don't think I'm I don't think that I can put it into words right now, right here, like this. But yeah, I would much rather write about it. And yeah, just I feel that whatever is happening is crazy, but it's not crazy in a super bad way, because it's leading to effects and mobilization and a lot of different things that
Yeah.
could lead to a much better future if and when we solve all of these issues.
I like your line of the really dark cloud with a really bright silver lining. I feel like that
Hmm.
that is a very nice sort of statement to overarch a lot of things that are happening right now. There is some good news as always, and
There's always a little bit of both.
yeah, there is, and it's always nice to come across that. There are corners of the internet where
Hmm.
positive people are having a conversation, and it's always fun to stumble across those because you see that not all people, I mean,
Hmm.
not all people in the world want to sort of get down to an argument every single time you step out, and by step out I mean step onto the internet. So it's been fun going
Right.
through those, and especially the cute dog and cat videos. Those are quite literally the best parts of some days. Uh, I think that there is a little bit of follow up that we need to sort of address before we move into other things, and that is, well, the first one I want to talk about, or not talk about so much, is the seen and unseen that you mentioned, especially that episode.
Right.
um, I listened to it. It was pretty good. It was really informative. So I'm happy for that recommendation. And while I was sort of on that journey of like realizing, oh hey, podcasts can also have like informative natures, where I have been more or less thinking about them in a conversational way. I stumbled upon a Nat Geo podcast.
Hmm.
I think it's called Overheard at Nat Geo or something like along those lines. I'll put it in the show notes. But they take excerpts from
Okay.
different interviews that National Geographic is doing, and they convert those excerpts into like an episode where they provide more information like regarding the topic. And I really liked it. The first episode that I heard was interestingly about Ladakh.
Okay.
It was about the ice stupas, which a very, very smart person named Sonam Wangchuk has created for the high altitude desert that is Ladakh. And then there were other episodes, and I really liked that. So now I'm starting to explore that sort of side. But this brings me to a little bit of a different point, which I heard from a bunch of people quite recently regarding podcasts in general. And I kind of want your opinion on this.
Okay.
So a lot of people whom I spoke to, they told me that they found it very hard to listen to a podcast when they were doing something else, because they found it difficult to pay attention, to listen, and to pay attention to what they were doing at the same time. So they ended up listening to a podcast
Okay.
under very specific occasions, when either what they were doing was super basic and monotonous, where they didn't have to think about it, or they just had some free time and they listened to the podcast, and that's all that they did. So in terms of podcast listening, I mean, how do you do it, and what would you kind of recommend would be a good way of approaching, a good attitude to have towards podcast listening, or at least to our podcast listening?
It's quite interesting that you've had experiences like that told to you, because I feel quite the opposite actually, because I feel like it's much easier to listen to podcasts when I'm doing nothing else. Like there are certain podcasts, like I guess this is gonna be like a rapid fire of me recommending a few of them. So there's the podcast that Roman Mars has about design, which is probably quite famous after his really sort of viral TED talk that he gave about flag design. It's called 99% Invisible, 99PI, and it's quite nice. It's about design, and the best part is that it uses a lot of music and sound cues, and they're really short episodes, so they're much better and enjoyed as standalone experiences where you just lie down or turn down the lights and listen to them on your headphones. But the rest of the podcasts that I listen to, usually those are really long, like like The Seen and the Unseen. Recently they've been having like multiple hours of episodes, like 2 hours and 2.5 hours, and those, or even the other podcasts that we usually listen to, like Hello Internet and Cortex, and some of the other ones that I don't really know if you listen to, things like Gimlet Media's Reply All and Science Versus, and they do sort of longer, sort of almost 40-minute to around an hour long episode, and I find those much better to be heard when driving or when commuting, or just in general when I'm doing chores at home or things like that, because I think the best part about a podcast is that it's involving in a very third person sense. Like when you're listening to music, for example, you're just listening to music. You're just a passive listener in most scenarios, unless you're like an extreme audiophile where you're thinking about every little note and everything. But on the whole, music is just a one-way communication, whereas in a podcast, like we do sometimes, it's almost like for example, for us, when we're speaking, I'm talking to you, but also from time to time I'm speaking to a third presence, which is the audience member. So now that I'm talking to you, the listener, you will see that when I'm talking to you, and then Mihir becomes like a third person, and then we are basically like three people communicating as if we were three people just sitting in a room like friends and just talking about something. And I like this kind of an experience better when I'm doing other stuff, because then there's not a lot of importance put on my shoulders as a listener. It wouldn't be that I need to be involved, or I need to have a comment about everything. I can just chill out around the person, around two people that I like, and I'm just listening to the conversation. But then from time to time, I'm like, oh yeah, I really agree with you there, or something like that. So it feels more natural in that term, where I can sort of dip in and out through the podcast whenever I feel like it. And because they are very long, it actually probably benefits from having that dipping in and out, because then you're not basically, then we can have conversations where I get into a whole rant about something, and it's not as boring, because then they almost unconsciously will tune out for a little bit, and then they'll come back, and then it'll be about the time when I'm about to end my rant.
Okay, so I have a slightly, like, I have a next question follow up to that, is that at least personally, when I listen to a podcast and when I do stuff on, like, I listen to the podcast as a secondary sort of thing, where my primary thing is the actions that I'm doing, the chores or whatever, right? My attention is focused here. My question is that how much do you remember? Because for me, when I am doing something, like you said, it is like I am sort of listening to a conversation as a third person in a room, but at the same time, I am doing my task. I am washing the dishes, or I am cleaning the house, or whatever, for example. And since that takes primary concern, I like you said, I zone out, I dip in and out of attention, right? But I find that many times I have completely, like, forgotten to listen to the next, like, previous 10 minutes. So I kind of jump into a conversation where I have no idea what's happening. It is so new, because they have been speaking for the last 15 minutes while I was really engrossed in some thought and some action. Because they said something and I went off on a tangent on my own. And when I come back, it's like they're on a different topic, they have some other opinions, and I am lost. And I mean, does that happen to you? That's the first question. And the second question is, if yes, how do you sort of resolve that problem of, I missed the last 10 minutes?
So for the first part, it does happen to me, and I think it's quite natural for that to happen, even in a conversation. So for example, if you were at a party, like I'm not saying like a huge massive spring breakers kind of party, but like even if it's a small party, like a house party, you have a few friends over, you're just having coffee and just talking and chilling out. And there will be times when you say there's like 5 of you in a room and you're talking to one of your friends about something, and there's a tangential conversation that's happening across the room, and you're not really listening to that, and then some word sort of comes up, and then it sort of grabs your attention, and then you move on to that conversation. I feel that's sort of analogous to the way I consume my podcast, where I'm like, okay, I'm really so for example, if I'm listening to a Hello Internet podcast where they're talking about some book, and I happen to have read the book, and then I will go on a whole tangent about, oh yeah, and then there was that thing also, and then that's a good example of what they're saying, and then I'm on this whole tangent for 10 minutes, and then something else strikes me from their conversation, and then I come back to what they're saying, and I keep my thought aside. So I think it's sort of like that, where again, in a room of your friends, you can sort of have parallel conversations with people. In this case, it would be a conversation of you with yourself, and then the conversation that you're having with the podcasters. And I think that that's just the most natural way to think about it, at least and I'm putting it into
Yeah.
words now because you've asked me the question, but like that's just the way I have sort of come to think about it.
Okay. But then in that case, if you miss something, right, when you went off on your tangent, you missed the next little bit of discussion. You don't really try to rewind it, right? You don't try to jump back to the point where you left the conversation.
Sometimes I do. So sometimes if I feel like I've missed out on something big, I will go back. Or sometimes it also happens that sometimes I will rewind a little bit and think that I've missed out on something big, but there wasn't
Right.
actually much, that I had zoned out for just a minute when I thought I'd zoned out for a few minutes. But that can also happen. So I don't think there's too much of a loss. And usually,
Okay.
if my phone's handy, I will rewind a little bit to see what they were talking about. But even if I don't, sometimes it's fine to miss things out, because then again, and I do this a fair bit, at least with some podcasts, that they have like a back catalog of say 100 or 150 episodes, and after I've gone through the entire thing and they haven't released a new episode in a while, I will go back and start at the beginning. So in those kinds of scenarios, I will listen to them again and maybe get a part of the podcast that I had missed out on before. So it's you win some, you lose some, but you mostly win more than you lose.
Okay. All right. Because for a long time, when I listened to podcasts, I was very particular. I didn't want to miss anything, and I thought the point of listening to a podcast was getting like 100% of the conversation. And at least for me, that philosophy was really bad, because it meant, like, especially for a podcast that is say an hour maybe or hour and a half, I listened to maybe 20 minutes and it was a very slow progress.
Right.
So I ended up not listening to many episodes, and I just felt like I was super slow in listening. And it kind of annoyed me a little bit that it was so slow, and I felt like I was hearing the same conversation like 3 times, because I had like 3 different tangents every single time. And it was really frustrating for me. And in my case, what I have sort of come to realize is sort of what you're saying, is that you win some, you lose some, and I'm not particular about the stuff I miss. And I think that's okay, because many of the podcasts I listen to are conversational stuff. So there's not a lot of information being discussed, so I don't have to pay attention to facts and information and knowledge.
Yeah.
It's just conversation, so it's okay. Like you said, like at a party. And also, I've stopped caring. Like, for me, it's there in the background. And if I miss like the entire episode also, I don't particularly like think too much about it, because like you said, if I'm going to go through it again, especially for the podcast that I like, I do end up re-listening to many episodes. I'll find it again and I'll hear it again. And even if I didn't, since it's not an informative podcast, I didn't miss much. It was just people talking, and it's fine. So that's how I've sort of come to working my problem with the podcast listening thing out. And podcast apps do help a lot here,
Right.
because they track your progress, as opposed to listening in the browser, which I used to do a lot, or listening on YouTube, which was slightly harder. And for that reason, I'm really happy that we have, like, now we are able to put this up on a podcast app or even Spotify, because it also tracks your progress.
Yeah.
But that's part of the thing for me. And the second bit is that now I find, like, the podcast, since it's an audio thing, my eyes and hands are unoccupied while I do it. Instead of playing something on Netflix in the background, I prefer the podcast, because, again, I don't really want to listen to it. Sometimes I find something entertaining and I laugh with it, but otherwise it's just there. And it's nice that it's there.
Yeah, it's a nice thing, because, and also, like, it's sort of like FOMO. It's like fear of missing out, where,
Yes.
it's it's the fear of missing out, but when you actually go to that place, you don't really miss out on that much. And that's the realization that I've had with, I think, most things in general, is that like if you were to rewind like 10 seconds and listen to that thing because you thought it was extremely important, maybe it wasn't. And also just that, even if it was a factual podcast, even if there was a lot of information coming at you, and like if you did zone out for a little bit, it's most likely that those few statistics or figures would not really matter so much as just the larger conversation about it. And there's also this other thing. I'm gonna put some cinema theory here because that's who I am. So basically, there's this idea of slow cinema, right? Which is, it's almost exactly as it sounds. It's slow cinema. It's films that are extremely slow, long-winded. They are really slow in their action, and it's on purpose. It's done that way. So you will have films that are 4 hours long, and it'll not have any big action sequences or anything of the sort. And it's done in such a way. I will give you a few recommendations. One is, I'll get to the recommendations a little later, but the point of those films is that you are watching the film, you're experiencing it, and you are just being provoked. You're just being poked at with the needles about, oh hey, now think about just the wind. Now think about the sun. Now here's a shot of just a plastic bag flowing in the wind, and then you're forced to do that for a little bit, and then when you sort of get entangled into that whole thing, and then you zone out for a little bit, and then you're thinking about how plastic bags are actually made and how they are so thin but still so durable, and how they go into the landfills. And when you're on this whole huge thing in your head, they've already moved past a few frames. So but it doesn't really matter so much, because it was just showing you other sort of random frames from say a tree sprouting or a flower just blowing in the wind or something like that. So you can pick and choose whatever things that interest you and that sort of that your brain is attracted to in that moment. But because of its sort of free flowing structure, it allows you to, as I said, dip in and dip out, and not feel extremely, and not have that sense of missing out. Because then since it is a little disjointed or long-winded or just slow, you don't feel like you're missing out on so much. Whereas if you were in a Marvel film, or if you were in a big Fast and Furious kind of film, and then even if you miss out for 5 seconds, you would feel like, oh my god, what just happened? Like, where did that car come out of? Or like, you get that overwhelming feeling. Whereas if you were watching, say, even something like Terrence Malick, which is a little bit more mainstream than most slow cinema, but if you were watching, say, something like Tree of Life, you could go out, if you were in a theater, you could go out to the washroom, you could get some popcorn, you could come back in, and you would not feel like you've missed out on so much. Because again, it's the fabric on the whole that matters, rather than the individual threads or the individual sort of bits of the thread. So I think podcasts sort of have that similar kind of thing, where they also have and because the way we value our time is quite relative. Because if you have a 30-second clip of something, you would put all of your attention on those 30 seconds of each and every frame of that clip. Whereas if you have a short film, something that's, say, 15 minutes long, you would pay attention to every second of it far more than if you were to watch something like Lord of the Rings, which is 4 hours. So again, I feel like the longer something is, the more leeway there is for you to have moments where you miss out on things, and I think that's great. So I was just gonna just give one recommendation for a slow film, and I think that can be a good illustration of what I meant by my
Okay.
whole thing. It's a movie by Jonas Mekas.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long film. It's 4 hours and 48 minutes, and it's called. It has a long title as well. It's called "As I Was Moving Ahead, Occasionally I Saw Brief Glimpses of Beauty." Okay, massive title, massive movie, and like there aren't any spoilers, so I'm just gonna tell you that it's just a bunch of clips, just film, just home video that he had, and just random sound bites that he had from his entire life. And he's a filmmaker, and at one point I guess he just randomly decided to put them together into one whole film, and he clearly admits in the first few minutes itself that there is no particular order to it. It is not edited together to make a massive commentary on anything. It's just bunch of clips of him and his wife and his friends, and just from his window looking down at the street in New York. And it's crazy, but it'll keep you mesmerized throughout. So if you start watching that film, and if you last the 15 or 20 minute mark, I think you will watch it till the end, because
Yeah.
again, there's some sort of beauty in the long-winded slow cinema,
Yeah.
and you will dip in and out, you will miss out on parts of it, but that's absolutely fine because it's designed to be that way.
Okay, so yeah, I mean that kind of answers my question, and it makes a little bit of sense, because I feel like if you're making something that's so long in terms of length or in terms of attention requirements, it starts to become a little bit irrational to expect everyone to be attentive every second of the way. I feel like that is simply too large a task for any person, and then it becomes sort of like an exercise in attention, whereas it's supposed to be, more
Right.
entertaining or thought provoking or something like that. But I have a question. So in what you described brought to my mind the two movies Baraka and Samsara.
Yeah.
uh, would you consider them also in a similar category, or are they not slow cinema?
Again, the boundaries are very fuzzy around slow cinema, because there are films that can be classified as slow cinema which are actually quite short. Like there's a film by Gus Van Sant, the guy who made Good Will Hunting. Gus Van Sant made this film called Elephant, and it's a very weird film. Not weird like quirky, but just a very weird experience to have. And it's just like very short but still slow cinema. Whereas there are films, I think Samsara is a bit of an extreme on one end, where it is just pure visual beauty. I'm pretty sure that it would be very close to being slow cinema, just because of the structure and because of everything. But in some ways it sort of goes away from slow cinema, some of the main characteristics of slow cinema. And I don't think that's really the scope of this conversation, because then that gets into if we're provoking emotion and what the actors and the subjects are doing and what they're not doing. So I think that can be a separate conversation later. But I do recommend Samsara, Baraka, and Kronos. I think that was the trilogy.
Okay.
And there's a previous trilogy which is very similar, called the Katsi trilogy, I think,
Okay.
which is Koyanis Katsi, and two other names which are very difficult to pronounce. But all of these are really good films. And also watch the one that I had recommended. As I was moving ahead, occasionally I saw brief glimpses of beauty, and that's essentially what the movie is.
Okay. Because, okay, now I just want to describe a little bit what Samsara is, because I think we've had a discussion without kind of giving the listener a little bit of an idea of what it's about.
Okay, though I would say it's very difficult to describe since it's so many different things and not much at all. So you can very clearly just take our recommendation on the face of it and just go and
Yeah.
watch the film and just experience it for yourself and make up your own mind. But if you were to describe it, go ahead.
I guess it's just shots of nature and people and life on this planet combined with music. I mean, they're gorgeous, gorgeous scenes and they're really beautiful to watch, and the music is also really nice. But I can't do any better than that to describe either of those.
Yeah, it's a visual treat. It's something that's absolutely just magnificently shot. Some of the best visual cinema ever. And I think just one little bit of trivia is I think that they used cameras and film that was that is at such a great resolution that even today we are struggling to sort of reach those levels, because they just used an extremely large film, like I mean the physical film, to shoot the film. So yeah, it's extremely beautiful. The music is also really, really, really amazing. And I think these films, like these 6 films, would sort of be in the scenario, in the bleak scenario that we had to abandon
Yeah.
the planet and go to a different place. I think if we could only take 6 films with us, I think it should be these 6, because they show so much of our planet and the people and the animals and everything. I think it's a living document of humanity and just Earth.
Okay, all right. Another slight mini question. This is just like me satisfying my personal curiosity. Uh, does Court, the Marathi movie, also count as slow cinema?
It does. It does. It does. It is slow cinema, for a bunch of reasons. I think one very clear example I can give you from the film, for which clearly puts it in the slow cinema category, is the shot near the end where they're in a trial. Again, there are no real spoilers in for the film, so but watch it. It's amazing. It's on Netflix, at least in India, and it's hands down one of my favorite Indian films, and like up there in my favorite films of all time. So Court is a film about a man and his legal trials in the court system of India, and it's brilliant. But so there's this one scene near the end where they're having their trial, and it sort of comes to a close where nothing much happens. They're basically like, yeah, we're going to extend it till later, and we have like a little summer break, so the court's not going to be in session for a few weeks, and then we come back, and then the camera just stays there, and everyone walks out of the room. Everyone, like, they shut off the lights, they shut off the doors, and they leave, and then you're in the black for a few seconds, and then you go to the next scene. So that's a very clear example of slow cinema. And just the entire film, it is slow cinema for a lot of different reasons, and I'll try to find some literature on that. I'll try to put in the description some reading if you want to read more about slow cinema.
Okay, all right. I mean, what you've described, I think, is good enough for me at least. I am not keen on reading much more, partly because it just sounds very academic. And in my head, at least, cinema and academics are slightly distanced from each other. So I think that
Okay, you have offended me.
I am sorry
No,
about
no,
that.
no. The entire conversation that I was having about slow cinema,
Yeah.
it was reminding me of a bunch of conversations that I've had with one of my professors, and he's a big proponent of slow cinema, and so am I, it seems. So, yeah.
I think it might be great. I really have not had that much experience with it, nor do I know the whole sort of background to it. But like recently, I have started discovering that doing things the slow way is really rewarding, and that kind of makes me, it it's sort of like what I said about the documentaries that I started watching, I started finding more patience in myself to kind of sit these things through. And once I'm able to sort of get into, like you said, there's a little bit of a initial resistive period where I want to get away and get up and change my tabs or whatever from Netflix away. But now,
Right.
once that I do sit through those periods, they are rewarding in many cases, not all. So maybe there is some truth to what you're saying. Unfortunately, I haven't experienced it yet. So yeah, going past that, I feel like I found my answer, and I hope that that the listener who is listening right now and who has maybe missed out the last couple minutes also realizes that it's okay to miss it out. And I think like that's also part of listening to a podcast, right? That you miss some stuff, because I guess otherwise we're dealing with a very very prominent sort of attitude that you can't miss anything, like you said, like the whole FOMO thing. And I don't know, I guess that's how I approach it. And let's see, I hope that it helps people. All right, moving on to our homework, which we mentioned the last time, was the Up series. And we were supposed to watch the first two
Yeah.
episodes. And I was supposed to watch the first two episodes. You've seen it all.
Okay.
And I did. I just watched the first two.
Yeah.
After watching the second one, I was really excited to watch the third one, and it was hard to control that impulse of not going ahead. But I have not seen the third one. I have stopped with the second. So I think we could discuss any thoughts.
Right. So just a small little description of the series for people who haven't heard the last episode, or maybe they missed out on that bit. So in 1964, the BBC basically commissioned a few documentaries in something that they called World in Action, and one of those documentaries was a film called 7 Up. And it was directed by Paul Almond, and it was one of the researchers involved was Michael Apted. They basically made this documentary where they basically wanted to see kids, 7-year-olds, and see their reaction to the times and what they thought about things and people around them and all that kind of stuff. It's very simple. There's a bit of humor. Like, these are 7-year-old kids. They're extremely cute. They're talking about stuff. And the entire premise was that these were the kids that would grow up to be the accountants and the businessmen of 2000, of the new millennium. And there was this entire thing that they had about seeing where the future is headed. And they had their entire sort of tagline was this proverb, give me a child until he is 7 and I will give you the man. I don't know if there's a lot of truth in that comment, and I'm not even entirely sure I understand it completely and its context and everything. But anyway, so the documentary was that. And something that I realized just today when I was reading up more about it is that it was not actually thought of as a series of documentaries. It was thought of as just a one-off, and they would just see these kids' perspective on life. And it went on to be one of the researchers that I mentioned, Michael Apted, basically took it on himself to go and find these kids and interview them for their entire life. Basically, he would go and interview them every 7 years. And he basically made this series, which is I think 9 episodes till now. So they made 7 Up, then they made 7 plus 7, which is 14 Up, and then 21, and then so on. And the most recent one came out last year in 2019. So it has been a series where these strangers, basically these 14 kids from England, were basically documented. Like, snapshots from their entire life were taken, and from different classes and from different parts of the country and things like that. And you get a very interesting sort of deep dive into the human psyche, in my opinion. What were your thoughts when you saw the film?
The first one for me felt quite a bit like just any old documentary. There is the person who is the the center of the documentary, in which in this case that was the kids, and they're asked some questions, and they give the best answer that they have, and it was really weird because I don't think I've seen many documentaries with kids in them. And like, I guess nobody really asks kids for their opinions about stuff in the world. So
Right.
I mean,
Especially for really important stuff.
yeah,
Like you don't see, like you will ask a kid, what's your favorite food and what do you do with your friends, but you don't really ask them about politics, or you don't ask them about
Yeah.
people of other colors and things like that, which is unique, especially for a film that was made in 1964.
yeah. I mean, the questions were not something that I would imagine you could ask a kid. However, I am happy that they did, because it's the children give really interesting answers, and it's really nice to see. I mean, first of all, I think, like, as we get further away from childhood, we sort of forget, and we tend to diminish our understanding and our interests and our curiosities.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's maybe this kind of perspective that kids don't know enough about the world or whatever. So they have a very optimistic vision, and they don't know too much. They don't have much to say, is, I think, might be an opinion. And it was really nice to see that kind of getting shattered in the first one. But for me,
Right.
it wasn't a very big deal. It was just like, it was a documentary and it was fine. I mean, there was not much to be said. There was no strong point, because it was by itself, it felt like a setup. It was the foundation stone to something that was much bigger. It felt like a hypothesis is being laid
Right.
down, and then now you have to conduct the experiment, which will either prove you right or wrong, or give you some results that will allow you to reflect back on the hypothesis later. For me, that was the
Right.
first documentary. The second one was a little bit more interesting, because I noticed, like, some of the kids, now that they were 14, they had a slightly more mature outlook on the world, more conventional as well in some ways. Like, you could see sort of societal thinking start to fall in, where maybe earlier there wasn't that much. And
Yeah.
it was kind of neat to see that some of them were sort of commenting on what they said in the last documentary. So it was fun to have that, because they have shown, like you said, they have shown little bits from the first documentary in the second one, to just have serve as a refresher as to the same question, the answer that they gave when they were 7 and the answer they gave when they were 14. And I thought that was really curious, because they referenced themselves in their answer as a 14-year-old. I kind of liked it. I also kind of I was able to relate a little bit as well to a 14-year-old feeling of how I felt about some of the questions that they're asking, and some of the things I started thinking about what I cared about when I was 14, and it was nice to reflect. And some of the answers that they gave, I thought, were really, really mature. Like, I don't think personally, as 14-year-old, I would have given ever an answer that was so well thought out, or seemingly so mature.
Right.
So yeah, for me, the second one, now it started creating like a data point, and I had sort of my own expectations of what is going to happen, or what these people will grow to be, just because of their sort of philosophies about different stuff, their thoughts about the world. Which is why I had to struggle not to play the third documentary, because I was really curious to find out,
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure if our homework was to watch the first 2 documentaries or the first 3 documentaries, because I thought it was the first 3 documentaries, and till yesterday I was like, yeah, I've seen it once before, and I have like very strong opinions about it, and it's fine, I can just talk about it. But today I started thinking maybe I should watch it another time. So just
Okay.
this evening I did a marathon and I watched the first 3 documentaries, especially because the first 2 are just 40 minutes long,
Okay.
and the third one is an hour and 30 minutes. So anyway, I might have overdone my homework like like I did in school. But anyway, so the idea is that something that you referenced also is the fact that from the second documentary onwards, you start having a reference point, because if you just picked up like a group of random 49-year-olds and took their opinions, I don't think it would count for much if you hadn't done that for their life, right? The thing that sets this documentary apart from any other series or any other documentary is that you see the 7-year-old, you see the 14-year-old, you see the 21-year-old, and you see the differences in those people,
Right.
or the consistency in those people, and you and that is sort of what makes this so unique, because it feels like you get to see an entire life. Because I think in the most recent one they are all 63, and so which means that they're around retirement age. So we've seen them grow from 7-year-olds, like really really small children, through teenage, through getting their first jobs, and then sort of moving, and then getting married, having their own kids, and then sort of getting to a point of retirement. So it's a very unique experience, because and this is not something that I would recommend, but I think it would be quite interesting if you just watch the last one, because I think the last one came out as a 3-part like mini series. So it came out as 3 parts, 1, 2, 3. So you could, and because it does have clips from the previous episodes, so you have those filler moments, but I think it's also a much better experience to actually see them grow through all of those documentaries, and seeing it sort of more fleshed out. So yeah, I think the point of references is very important, but one thing that is so beautiful about the film is that you get to see such a big variety. It just, even if they're all people from one country, there is a huge variety in, and I think it's extremely deliberate on their part, picking kids from particular segments of society. So they have 2 kids from a children's home, they have a few kids from like really like private education of the highest caliber, and then they have 1 or 2 kids who are from like smaller villages. And you like, I think I'm not sure how much effort they put into actually selecting these children to get a bigger sort of foundation, but I think they've done a very good job to select these people. But also there's there's this thing that you see on Facebook and Instagram from time to time, these there's a Japanese word for the feeling, the realization that other people also have full lives, that strangers on the street actually have their own human full lives and universes of their own. So I think this documentary is the closest you can have to actually have a realization of that sort, where you actually get to see these kids, like in the first 2 episodes itself, you see them grow from saying they like, I think one of the kids says, I think his name is Andrew, he says in the first one, when he's asked about girls, and he says, yeah, they're boring and all of that, and in the second one he says, they're not as boring now. And you see that little bit of a change that you get from as you grow up, which is very interesting. And you get to see that in a lot of different ways, because some of them mature really quickly, some of them don't mature for a long time, and you get to see a huge difference. I think one of the main premises of the series was to show class differences, to show the lives of a kid who was extremely rich, or who had his entire life planned out for him, versus kids who were just out and sort of had to fend for themselves. So it's just like it ends up becoming so diverse, and it ends up giving you an experience that, I mean, I'm pretty sure that you're intrigued now, but once you watch more of them, I think you would feel the sense of awe that I feel, where you feel like, the thing is that there are there are bits and pieces of these kids that I see in myself, especially one or two of them with whom I relate a lot, and
Right.
I think most people can find someone there to relate with, and when you watch all of these, you almost feel like you're getting you have a time travel, that you have a time machine, and then you're traveling into the future to see how you might end up when you're 56 years old.
Okay, I am definitely more intrigued and way more interested than I was the last time, because like I think I mentioned that I kind of thought I was curious but also slightly hesitant, and now having watched the first two, I am completely hooked because the possibilities are so many, and then it's almost like a TV show, or even a really nice story, just a book or movie, doesn't matter, a really nice story where you keep wondering what happens next, right? But in this case, it's not fictional,
Right.
and that realization just like adds so much gravity to the whole situation for me. At the same time, it makes me equally interested in what happens next, but knowing that there are very human decisions being taken,
Right.
and it's our world pretty much, although certainly a few years ago, like all of those kind of factors make it very, very intense as well.
Yeah.
So I am very excited to see the next few episodes. I think then, listening to your description,
Yeah.
right now, listening to you talk about the next episodes, I feel like maybe we should hold off. I will watch the rest as a homework, and let's have a discussion once I have seen all of them, because discussing, I think, any one of them is not as interesting as discussing the entire set of documentaries together.
Right.
I get that feeling just watching two episodes, because, like I said before, one episode isn't a
Yeah.
lot to discuss about. Two episodes is suddenly meaningful, and I'm assuming 3 and 4 would make it exponentially more so. So I think let's push that homework a little bit
Yeah.
more and extend it to all the up series, and let's discuss that the next time. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, I'm all for it. I would love to discuss this. Like, I would start an entire podcast just to discuss this series, because there is so much to unravel. And again, this is something that we can discuss later, but I just want to hint at it now. So there's two things that can happen based on. So again, it's just every documentary builds up on the last one, because you use, so in the third one you'll see bits from the second one and bits from the first one, and that's sort of the general idea. And so there are two things that happen. One is contradiction, where a younger version will say something, and then the future version says, oh yeah, no, I didn't end up doing that, or oh, I was so stupid back then, or that kind of thing. I remember one of our friends used to say this in school. He would go, oh, I was so stupid back then. And that's a kind of sentiment that I'm sure everyone has, that, oh, I was so stupid 6 months ago. But it's very interesting, because that does happen a lot in our lives. But there is also consistency. So you will see someone who says that he wants to become a certain thing. They end up in every subsequent episode, meaning as they grew up, every year they were moving towards that particular objective. So you will see a sort of consistency in that. And the thing is, even when there are contradictions,
Yeah.
when they go astray, or like one of the kids, I think in the first one, he says he wanted to be an astronaut. And in the second one, he says,
Right.
oh no, I don't actually want to be an astronaut. It's quite stupid or boring or something of that sort. And you see that even though his superficial idea has changed, but his perspective on things have not changed. He's still focused on a particular thing. And the other kid with him, Neil is one of the most interesting characters throughout the series. And you know, in the first one, he's this really bright, cheerful kid who will talk about just about how they play. So they play with swords, and they're doing all of this stuff, and he's jumping all over the place, and he's really cute. And I think he's on the poster of the series as well. And then in the second episode, he becomes more tempered, and he's talking about how he plays chess, and then there is rivalry, and there is competition, and how there is pressure, and he's talking about all of that stuff as he grew up, just from 7 to 14. And his journey is I can't wait to talk about the rest of the series, but
give me some time until I watch it.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I will. So there's these things that are extremely important when you watch the series, and it's just interesting to see kids talk about racism, and kids talk about their education and their ambitions, and how it's not as cut and dry as a kid saying that he wants to be an astronaut, but and how reality sort of changes that. And we all know that like everyone who dreams of being an astronaut is not going to be an astronaut, but
please don't. But I am quite happy that like they've done this, because I see like reflections of my own, like I see parts of my own self from when I was that age. And what's curious to me is that what happens to my reflections, like I am guessing they will turn into some sort of projections, like hopeful thoughts about the future once I cross the age where I am right now. I wonder if the relatability factor will go down with the characters that I relate to right now, purely because of experience and age. But that's like one of my curiosities. That is like one of the questions I'm interested in. But like you said, it is really nice to see them talk about things in a very hopeful way when they're 7. I mean, future episodes will sort of kind of elaborate more on that, obviously.
Yeah.
But I am quite surprised that there are kids who have this kind of notion of which way they're going, because I don't think I've ever had that, and it just feels very weird to have, like I can imagine how much of a sort of mental anchor it would be for a person to know their path, you know. At the same time, I can also see how having that anchor could be a negative thing, but I am very, very curious to what happens once you have that anchor, and once life happens to you, where does that take you? So okay, I think that's a discussion next episode.
Yeah.
And I think we should change the topic before you spoil more stuff, because I feel your excitement and I want to match it, but I haven't seen the other episodes yet. I'm sorry.
You know, one more thing that I just want to stress on before we move on is it's quite obvious, but even the way it's very natural to speak of it in terms of episodes, in terms of in this film versus that film, or in this episode, or at 7 versus at whatever 49 or whatever. But it's very important not to judge these people, because some of them do have opinions. Like the film like tries to delve into, even from the second episode, from 14 years old, they're asking them which political party do you support, and it becomes it's very clear that like these kids have different paths, or because of their circumstances they feel a certain way, and for us to make these assumptions as older people, or as just third person observers. But for these people, they are just real people. They're not characters, they're not fictional characters that we can comment on about as much, because it's a very weird thing, and it's something that you touched upon the last time we spoke about it, is how they even managed to get like their parents to sign off on such an experiment. But I guess part of the answer is the fact that they didn't know that it was going to be a continuing thing, and they didn't have like a long-term contract or anything. They just basically tracked them down and they were like, yeah, we want to do this thing. Do you want to do it from now on? And they thankfully agreed. So yeah, it's very interesting, but it's very important to think of them as more than just guinea pigs in a crazy experiment, because again, they are people with their entire lives, and we only see snapshots of their lives from particular points. Like there are things that happen in between those two documentaries, but you get to see just parts of it. So again, it's important not to judge them on a whole.
All right. So I have a couple more things from follow-up, just little bits and pieces I found as I was researching some things. So one of the follow-ups is about the thing you mentioned about the name of the bear, that it's a name that didn't actually mean the animal. It was used as a reference.
Right.
And so sort of digging through that, or rather I was just curious, so I kind of tried to look it up, and I don't know how true this is, but I did find a little bit of information saying that the original name for the bear was Arcto.
Yeah. It's actually where we get the word Arctic from, the land of the bear.
You have a lot more names coming from the root Arcto, but bear comes from a word that's closer to Bjorn in Swedish, and it's basically a older word meaning the brown one. So they called the bear the brown one, or the brown animal, and the belief behind that was, they all people back then also hunted bear as game, like they hunted and ate bear, but the belief was that if you named things, it was not just that it would come and find you, that was part of it, but it was that the stuff that you hunted, you didn't name it because naming it would scare it away, but because it would know that you were present and it would be alerted to your presence if you said its name. I find that kind of interesting. So yeah, that's a little bit of a fun fact, more or less.
Yeah, I think I put that in the show notes for the last episode as well, because when we were talking about it, the thought just came into my head because I read it somewhere, and then when I actually just searched a level deeper about it, I found that we actually do know the word, and like it's quite obvious. Like the Latin word for the brown bear, the scientific name is actually Ursa arctos, so it means bear. So yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, but we do know the word, and I have made that change, and I have made that correction in the show notes for the last one as well.
Yes, it'll be in the show notes. I had another tiny follow-up about the midnight sun.
Okay.
Having experienced it recently in its full fury, I was able to kind of feel the complete mind-boggling thing that is this experience, because like I said, generally if I'm at home, then after a certain time, luckily enough for me, in the north there's a hill that blocks the sun, so round about midnight we don't see the sun, we have a shadow,
right?
So it feels like night has fallen, and it's much quieter and dimmer, and that's nice, and that's usually around the time when I go to bed. But recently I was out and I was out quite late. But I was in a different place, so I didn't have the sun blocker. I could just feel myself as you know, as 8 o'clock became 9 and 9 became 10. My eyes were strained so much. Like I was longing for some would kind of relieve the pressure that I could feel it on my eyeballs, and there was nowhere to go.
Right.
I mean, I could shut my eyes. But even closing my eyes wasn't good enough. Like the brightness outside was so much.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me of a feeling like you know, when you're traveling in the train and you're going overnight. So maybe you haven't had enough sleep through the night. You're trying to sleep in the morning. But the sun's angle is through the windows directly onto your face, and no matter what you do, you can't hide from it.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of like an all-seeing eye, maybe. But
or like Sauron.
exactly. So but yeah, it was particularly stressful for my eyes, and that was a unique experience. I don't want to have it again.
Okay.
But it was fun to do it once, and I kind of realized like what people living here must face and must have faced, you know, back in the older days. And I have much more respect now. Like I feel like the polar night wasn't as bad as the midnight sun. Because I mean, at least now with electricity and heating and lighting systems,
makes sense.
you can have more light, but you can't have more darkness. I mean, you can, but it takes a little bit more effort and more shuffling stuff around. Anyway, that's it from my end on the follow-up stuff.
On the astronomical phenomena end, I must point out that a few days ago we had the lunar eclipse. It was the annular eclipse, and it sort of it was going to be visible like much better from northern parts of India. But I did see a partial eclipse from where I live and just from my garden.
I thought you said lunar eclipse. Did you mean the solar eclipse? Maybe I misheard you.
I did mean the solar eclipse. I misspoke. I'm sorry.
Carry on.
I was actually thinking of because I remember having a conversation with somebody a while back about solar eclipses and lunar eclipses, and there was a time where they could not understand the difference between a lunar eclipse and just the phases of the moon.
Okay.
So I just want to clarify that.
Okay, sure.
Just simple definition. So a solar eclipse is when the moon passes in between the sun and the earth. So you see that the moon has blocked the sun. That's a solar eclipse. A lunar eclipse is when the earth is in between the sun and the moon, so the shadow of the earth falls on the moon.
Brilliant.
The phases of the moon that you see every 15 days or 30 days depending on the full cycle, is it 28 days?
Yeah, it's 28 days.
Anyway, let's just go with a month, roughly a month. So the phases of the moon is what you get based on the shadow of the moon falling on itself. Like if you had a ball like the moon which was lit up from the side, you would see half of it which was lit up and half of it in the dark. It's not the shadow of the earth, it's just its own shadow. So those are the phases of the moon, and they change based on the relative position of the sun and the moon, and the phases of the moon would happen regardless of if the earth existed or not. The eclipse, the lunar eclipse, would happen only if the earth existed and it passed in between the sun and the moon. So that was my just definitions for the three. And getting back to the solar eclipse that I saw, the partial solar eclipse that I saw, I saw it. It was quite nice. I do have some welding glass, so I must say that it's very important to take precautions before watching eclipses, because they do just burn your eyes out, as Galileo would probably tell us about. But yeah, I do have some welding glass from other photography experiments that I have tried for long exposures and things like that. But so I managed to take a a couple of photographs and some videos of the eclipse. It was partial, and my lens was not in the best condition, but I will put the pictures in the show notes. So you can see that, and it was quite interesting. I saw some pictures on Reddit, I think, and Instagram, especially of this one picture that someone had taken in Dubai, in UAE, which was really, really, really good. It was like sand dunes, and it was that classic picture of the moon that you usually see, that is as big as the person standing next to it. But in this case, it was the sun, and it was the eclipsed sun. And it was like the total annular eclipse, which was extremely beautiful. Annular is basically when, so as the sun and the moon, as we basically move around in this weird ballet, this weird choreography that we have, when the moon is relatively smaller than the sun, so it doesn't completely block it out. There's like a small ring around it. That's the annular eclipse. Whereas on a total eclipse, it covers it up completely. And yeah, it looks extremely beautiful, and you actually get to see the corona.
I could see that in the photo.
Yeah, I would love it if it was actually the corona that you can see in my pictures. I am sort of doubting it because, again, the optics of my lens were not the best, and it hasn't been serviced like ever. So
I don't know too much about like the optics side of it, right? But the photo that you sent me, when I kind of zoomed in, it looked like the corona to me, and I kind of would not be surprised because it is pretty big. So, and the only reason you can't see it is because, well, the sun itself, like the photosphere, is so bright. I would say that it is, although hey, there's always room for doubt and room for error, so let's not put a stamp on it.
Yeah, but I did try, because the thing is, it's very bright, and again, like the focus and everything is very difficult to get. It's much better if you have a telescope, but I unfortunately don't have one. So I used my lens at the highest magnification I could, and I put a piece of cardboard with a pinhole in front of it. So basically making my own little pinhole camera of sorts, which worked out much better than I had expected. And it's quite nice. It was a nice experience to actually do that and take that picture. So yeah, I'll put the high-res picture in the show notes. But do you want to clarify what a corona is, especially in current circumstances?
Right, okay, yeah, I completely sort of zoned out on that part. I completely forgot. Okay, so the corona is part of the sun's atmosphere. So like Earth has the stratosphere, the troposphere, different layers of the atmosphere. The sun has technically the outermost is the corona. Then within that, below that is the chromosphere, and below that is the photosphere, which kind of starts. It kind of merges into the boundary of what you might call the surface of the sun. And here the definition becomes kind of vague, because I mean, it's not vague in terms of radius. Like, we have clearly defined the numbers at what length, at what radius is the photosphere and so on. But the sun doesn't really have like a hard surface. It is plasma. And because it doesn't have a walkable surface to stand on, we came up with a density that we defined that, okay, this is what we're going to call the surface, and everything below is like underneath the surface of the sun, and everything above is quote unquote the atmosphere. So that's why I'm using these terms. And yeah, so I mean, the photosphere is what we see. It's the bright burning sun. On which wavelengths you're looking through, you'll see into the sun at different depths. And that's a lot of fun if you put those photographs side by side next to each other, going through like infrared to ultraviolet and X-rays and gamma rays, and throughout the spectrum of not visible, invisible light, you can get like these different pictures, and I find it very, very fascinating because you're essentially looking at different parts of the sun, different layers.
Yeah.
I think it's extremely amazing. But yeah, so the corona is very hard to see, and we see it during eclipses because the majority of the light gets blocked off. If the light gets blocked off, if the light gets blocked off, if the light gets blocked off.